My family had no idea I moved to another state 10 months ago. Until they needed me to come back just to look perfect at the wedding. My name is Dolores. And at 29 years old. It's been 6 months since I moved to Oregon and not a single call, text or email from my parents. Not a question about where I'd gone or why my apartment lease ended. Or why the birthday card they mailed never reached me. Not that they remembered my birthday anyway. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. I still remember that last day in Arlington. The sun was unseasonably hot for March. And sweat trickled down my back as I taped the final boxes shut. Jasper hoisted a crate of kitchen supplies with a grunt, while Ray folded down the flaps on my suitcase with her knee. My one-bedroom apartment was mostly empty by then. Just stacks of cardboard and the second-hand armchair I didn't bother to sell. "Are you sure you're not going to tell them?" Ray asked, wiping her forehead with the sleeve of her hoodie. "I mean, just a text or something." I looked up from where I was labeling a box bedroom. "Donate. They haven't asked where I live in 3 years. Why would I tell them I'm leaving?" She didn't argue. She just exchanged a look with Jasper, who muttered, "Still wild to me." It wasn't wild to me. It was normal. Expected. I'd been the extra in their family portrait for as long as I could remember. Quiet. Invisible. Acceptable. Only when useful. Callum was the sun. The center, the reason the camera flashed. I was background. The U-Haul we'd rented creaked as we loaded in the final box. I shut the door with both hands. Pressed my palms against the metal until it clicked. Then I stood there for a moment, staring at the place I'd called home for almost a decade. Not because it held memories, but because it held silence. "Ready?" Jasper asked, swinging the keys around his finger. I nodded. More than ready. The drive to Ashland was long and quiet. I watched the landscape shift outside the window from city grit to redwoods. From crowded to clear. By the time we hit Oregon, something in me had already begun to loosen. My new apartment was nothing special. One bedroom. Slightly outdated kitchen. A narrow balcony overlooking the trees. But it was mine. Mine in a way nothing else had ever been. I hung my own photos. I set up my desk exactly the way I liked it. Cooked real dinners without anyone interrupting or ignoring me. I got up early. Logged into work. Watered the IRBs. And the kitchen window. Jasper and Ray visited every other weekend. Edith. My grandmother called every week without fail. No one else called. That was the part that made me laugh some nights. Not bitter laughter, but the kind that sounds hollow in an empty room. I had vanished. And no one even blinked. Not until last week when the phone rang and the name lit up. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at it. Theodore Rhodes, like it belonged to a different life. I picked up on the fourth ring. His voice came through. Clipped. Irritated. "You need to come home next weekend." I should have known what that call meant. The flatness in his tone wasn't disappointment or confusion. It was entitlement. I was being summoned. And not for my sake. I didn't ask for details. I told him I had plans and hung up before he could begin his usual follow-up lecture. Then I sat back at my desk. Stared out at the pine-covered ridge behind my apartment. And felt that old weight settle over me. Not sadness. Just recognition. This was how it had always been. When I was 8. I made honor roll for the 3rd time in a row. I laid the report card neatly on the kitchen table, where I knew my mother would sit down with her tea. She glanced at it once and said, "Good job, honey," without looking up from her phone. That same week, Caleb got a C+ on a math quiz and still got to pick dinner. The year I won first place in the regional science fair, I came home with a trophy half my height. My teacher had pulled me aside that morning and said I should be proud. I was. I wanted them to be too. At dinner, I placed the trophy on the counter. My father said, "Let's not make a big deal out of it. Dolores, your brother has finals." That was the year I stopped bringing awards home. By the time I turned 17, I knew I'd be paying for college myself. I got into a state school with a scholarship. Picked up 2 part-time jobs. And stopped coming home for breaks. It was easier that way. Cleaner. I graduated early. Moved into a shared apartment. Took whatever freelance work I could find. My resume grew faster than my social life. But I didn't mind. Work was something I could control. Work didn't forget me at the dinner table. Eventually, I landed a job with a cybersecurity firm based in Seattle. Remote flexible hours. Full benefits. I'd been there almost 3 years now. My boss said I had a knack for untangling the chaos that other engineers overlooked. My savings account had commas in it. My fridge had real food. My inbox had a pre-approved a letter from a mortgage broker. I was 29 years old, and finally thinking about buying a house. Nothing big. Just mina. So when my father's voice tried to pull me back into obligation, into performances, dressed as family duties, I didn't flinch. I just let the silence stretch long enough to make it clear I wasn't coming. You need to come home next weekend. That was the first thing he said. Not hello. Not how have you been, just a directive delivered like I was still 18, and waiting for permission to breathe. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Why? There was a pause. I could practically hear him rolling his eyes through the phone. Your brother's engagement dinner. Isa's parents want to meet the whole family. They're very traditional. Of course. Not a reunion. Not a reconnection. Just another image to maintain a daughter-shaped placeholder at the table to round out the illusion of family. I won't be there. Another pause. Sharper this time. What do you mean you won't be there? I mean exactly that. I said. I have other plans. Dolores. This is important for your brother's future. They're high-profile people. It'll reflect badly on us if you don't show up there. It was us. Not me. Not how I was doing or where I'd been. Just the optics. I moved to Oregon 6 months ago. I said. My voice steady. I'm not flying across the country for a dinner I wasn't even invited to until now. Silence. The kind that isn't quiet at all, but charged like air before a storm. You moved to Oregon without telling us. You didn't know where I was before. Why would this be different? His voice dropped low and tight. How dare you move without telling your family? What's your address? I almost laughed. Do you even remember my last one? He didn't answer right away. And that told me everything. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. I said. You're not asking because you care. You're asking because now it's inconvenient not to know. Dolores. This isn't how families work. No. I said. But it's how ours always has. I hung up my hand, didn't even shake for a moment. I just sat there, letting the silence rush back in. Then the screen lit up again. Missed call. Then another. Then a text from him. From my mother. Then call him. I didn't answer any of them. I just turned off my phone. Made myself tea. And stood on the balcony, watching the light drained from the sky. By the next morning, the text had turned from reminders into guilt, and from guilt into threats. By the end of the week, I'd received 6 voicemails, 11 texts, and 2 emails, with subject lines like, "Can we talk?" and "Family should stick together." My mother finally called. Her voice was tight with restraint. I like she was trying to sound warm without dropping the script. Sweetheart. This isn't like you. You've always been so respectful. Your brother is counting on you. Isa's parents are formal people. We need to show unity. Unity. A word that means nothing when it's only summoned for guests. I'm not going. I said simply. Dolores. Don't be difficult. I'm not. I'm being honest. She sighed. Frustrated. It's just one dinner. You don't have to stay long. Smile. Say a few words, and then you can disappear again. If that's what you want. You mean like I already have? Another silence. Then she hung up. Kaloum tried next. His tone was different. Less forceful. More confused. Look. I don't know what's going on between you and Mom and Dad. But can't you just show up for me? I almost felt something. Almost. But I remembered all the years he looked away while I was overlooked. No. I said. Not this time. The next day, my father called again. His voice had shed the pretense. If you don't show up to this wedding, he said, you're out of the will. I let the silence stretch just long enough to give him hope. I was weighing it. Then I said calmly. Clearly. I make more money than all of you combined. I could hear him inhale like he'd been slapped. You're bluffing. If you'd ever asked about my life, I said you'd know I'm not. He didn't respond. He just hung up. That was the last call I took. From that point on, I watched the messages come in like waves. First urgent. Then desperate. Then angry again. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I opened a new tab on my laptop and clicked back to the real estate listing I'd saved the week before. It was still there. 3 bedrooms. Cedar siding. Room for a garden. Grandma Edith called the next morning just as the sky turned pink behind the trees. She never waited for permission. Never checked if I was free. She just called and I always answered. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. Voice steady with that mix of gentleness and knowing. "How's the air up there today? Cool and quiet?" I said. "Like I like it." We talked for a few minutes about the lavender I'd planted on the balcony. About the deer that sometimes wandered behind the apartment. Then she paused. "They asked me to call you," she said. Not apologizing. Just stating the fact. I figured I said. "Let me guess. Convince me to come back and play the part." They didn't use those words. "But yes," she said. "Your mother's been pacing. Your father's in a mood. They're panicking because they miss me." She hesitated just long enough because his parents are watching and asking questions. I laughed under my breath. Of course. My value had finally surfaced. Tied neatly to someone else's expectations. "I'm not going." "Grandma." "I know," she said. "I wouldn't either. That's why I always picked up." She didn't sugarcoat things. She didn't make excuses for them or pretend the past hadn't happened. She remembered my birthdays. I sent me postcards from her little trips. Asked about my job. And actually listened to the answers. She was the only one who ever looked directly at me and saw more than what I could offer. "I just wanted you to hear it from someone honest," she said. "Not because I think you owe them anything." "Thank you," I said. "Are you okay?" "I am," I said. And I meant it. Really, I stayed on the phone with her until the tea and my mug went cold. She asked about the house I was looking at and whether I planned to paint the walls or leave them plain. We talked about furniture and fig trees and things that had nothing to do with obligation. By the time we said goodbye, the sun was warming the windows, and I had already opened the mortgage calculator again. The wedding day came and went without me. I spent the morning on a trail just outside Lithia Park, weaving between tall trees and early spring wildflowers. The silence out there wasn't empty. It was earned. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder what was happening on the other side of the country. I breathed deeply, let the wind move around me, and kept walking. When I got home that evening, there was a missed call from Grandma Edith. I called her back before even taking off my boots. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "You enjoying your mountain air every second?" She exhaled slowly. "Well, the wedding happened. I waited. It was tense," she said. "The kind of tension that looks polite on the outside but makes your neck stiff. Just sitting in the same room. Sounds familiar." She chuckled. "Your parents did their best to keep it together. But Mira couldn't stop fidgeting. Your father barely spoke." Isa's mother kept glancing around like she was waiting for someone. "Me, yes. And when she realized you weren't coming, she asked why." I closed my eyes. Let the moment land. What did they say? They tried different versions. First, they said you were sick. Then, that work had called you away. Then that you were traveling for some conference. All lies. Isa's mother knew it. You could see it in her face. She pressed harder. Asked why you hadn't been at the engagement party either. Asked why she only found out you existed a few weeks ago. And apparently she had a private conversation with your mother after the rehearsal dinner. No one knows exactly what was said. But your mother came out of it pale and quiet. I think she got read like a book. I almost smiled. "What about Callum?" He looked distracted all night. Kept checking the door. Never smiled long. I also looked upset through most of the ceremony. I don't think she bought the family portrait they were trying to paint. I sat down at the kitchen table, letting that sink in. Not out of malice. Just at the kind of satisfaction that comes from truth. Finally catching up to the noise. "They still think this is about a dinner party," I said. "I know," she replied. But Isa's parents saw it. Dolores. The imbalance. The omissions. The damage. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing in particular. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and scrolled through new listings. The house I'd been eyeing was still available. So I bookmarked it again. Just in case. A week after the wedding, Grandma Edith called again. I was in the middle of unpacking a box labeled Kitchen Fragile when the phone lit up with her name. "They're still talking about it," she said, without needing to explain what it was. "Isa's parents. Yes. They've asked Callum directly now why you weren't involved. Why no one mentioned you until the last minute. Why you've disappeared." And what did he say? He tried to downplay it at first. But I think even he's starting to realize it's not just going away. Isa's mother doesn't like being lied to. I set down a stack of plates and leaned against the counter. Is the marriage already cracking? There's tension. The kind that doesn't fade with a honeymoon. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't want things to fall apart for him. I just felt still like watching ripples in a pond after dropping a single stone. They've started asking around. Grandma said your parents wanting to know who might have your new number. Your address. They even asked me again. You didn't tell them. Right, of course not. I told them if you wanted to talk to them. You would. I breathed out slowly. Thank you. They're nervous. She continued. Not just about you. About what Isa's parents might do. What they might say. What this might mean for Callum's future. They're worried about damage control. I said. Not about me. Yes. She said quietly. But they're starting to realize this doesn't just disappear. The way they treated you. It left marks. I looked around the small kitchen. Sunlight on the counters. New dish towels folded by the sink. A window above the stove that overlooked a row of pines. This wasn't just where I lived. It was mine. They're the ones who disappeared. I said. They just didn't notice until someone else did. She didn't reply right away. But I could hear the pride in her silence. The kind that never had to be spoken out loud. That night I finished unpacking the kitchen and lit a candle by the sink. The house already felt like home. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. My father's blocky, careful print. Like he thought neatness could cover history. I stood at the mailbox for a long moment. The envelope heavy despite its weight. I didn't bring it inside. I walked straight to the fire pit in the backyard. Struck a match and dropped it in the paper. Curled inward. Blackened. Then disappeared into ash. I already knew how it ended. The next morning, I signed the final paperwork for the house. My name on every line. No consigner. No conditions. Just mine. Jasper and Ray texted about flights for next month. They wanted to see the place and help me plant the first flowers. I'd already cleared a corner of the yard for tomatoes and thyme. Later that evening, I registered for a graduate course in digital forensics. Not because I needed it. Just because I could. I changed my phone number the same week. Only a handful of people got the new one. Edith. My boss. Jasper, Ray. That was enough. No more surprise calls. No more texts asking for favors disguised as obligations. No more family dinners where my name was an afterthought. The house was quiet. Not lonely. Just honest. 6 months later. My backyard was filled with voices and the smell of roasted corn and grilled peaches. Jasper was manning the grill like it was a science experiment. Ray balanced a pitcher of sangria in one hand and a stack of mismatched cups in the other. The folding table overflowed with potluck dishes. Quiche. Sesame noodles, a suspicious-looking casserole someone insisted was a family recipe. A neighbor's golden retriever flopped at my feet. Across the yard. My coworker's daughter, Marin, tugged at my sleeve and handed me a plastic bracelet she'd made from string. You're my aunt now, she said solemnly. But the fun kind. I'll take that, I said, slipping it on. Later. As twilight settled in, someone I barely knew from the next street over asked, do you have family back east? I didn't hesitate. Not anymore. There was a bit of quiet. And then I smiled, gesturing to the table where Jasper was laughing. So hard he'd spilled lemonade on his shirt. Where Ray was dancing barefoot to a playlist I didn't even know I had. But I have this, I said. And I meant it. When everyone had left in the yard was quiet again. I gathered the plates, folded the chairs, and stood at the edge of the garden with the string bracelet still on my wrist. Fireflies blinked near the fence. My house glowed softly behind me. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was mine. Story 2. My parents decided to take my sister on vacation instead of me. Then she ended up ruining the trip and getting arrested. And now, finally, my parents are seeing what she's really like. A 2-3-year-old woman. I have a younger sister, Lisa. Shuba. Who honestly seems to me to be the personification of evil in this world. For years, I did everything I could to make my parents see what I was really like. But they never believed me. At least not until now. To be clear, I've always had a somewhat complicated relationship with my parents, and a lot of it is Lisa's fault. They adore her because my mom lost a baby before Lisa was born. Something that hurt her deeply. When Lisa was finally born, they saw her as their miracle. The baby girl who came to heal their hearts. So they showered her with attention and affection, put her on a pedestal, and everything revolved around her. I want to be clear that I did love my sister when we were children. But little by little, I realized that she had an impressive gift for manipulating everyone. Even though no one else noticed. She always twisted things to her advantage and was very good at playing the victim. I remember once, on my birthday, my grandparents gave me an antique pocket watch that was amazing. My grandmother told me it was a family heirloom. And I was thrilled. Lisa, who was clearly jealous, I kept insisting that I lend it to her. I told him no. That it was my gift. And although he tried to convince my parents, they didn't listen because my grandparents had given it to me. That night, knowing full well that I'm scared of spiders, he went and put a spider in my pillow for me to find when I went to bed. I woke up feeling something moving across my face. And I screamed like crazy. My parents came running, worried. And Lisa acted surprised and like a good sister. But later, alone, she confessed to me with a super cynical smile that she'd put the spider there to teach me a lesson. I was stunned to see how calm she was. As if nothing had happened. Another time, I had a crush on a guy from school named Mark. And I worked up the courage to invite him over to my house to watch a movie. I was incredibly nervous. So I even put on a pretty dress. As soon as Mark arrived, Lisa spilled a glass of juice on my dress. Dying of laughter. I felt incredibly embarrassed and had to go change. Trying to pretend nothing was wrong. And to top it all off, Lisa started telling Mark some really embarrassing things from when she was a kid and wouldn't leave us alone for a second during the movie. As Mark was leaving, Lisa gave him a mocking smile and told him she could surely find someone much better than me. Mark left quickly. He was obviously uncomfortable the whole time. I couldn't believe how mean and calculating my sister could be. For years, I told my parents everything she did. But they always excused her by saying she was immature or didn't know what she was doing. They just didn't want to face reality. Every time I complained, they ended up saying I was the problem and didn't even notice me. So I just stopped saying anything. Lisa continued to be the spoiled one. And I, who'd always been straightforward, I felt increasingly out of place in my own family. So I focused on school and managed to get into a good university, which helped me get out of the house and start living my life. But every time I returned on vacation, Lisa made it clear that she disliked my presence. She wouldn't even speak to me. I wouldn't even sit near me at the table. And if I talked to my parents, she'd interrupt. She constantly looked for ways to make me uncomfortable and even messed with my things to borrow them, only to break or lose them. My parents never said anything to her, they just asked us to get along. That's why I started looking for any reason not to go home on vacation and preferred to stay with my college friends. Honestly, my parents didn't really care. They said it was because I wanted to be independent. And that was it. When Lisa finished high school, she didn't have enough GPA to get into college. So she enrolled at a community college and never had to leave home. Meanwhile, I'm working for an international company in San Francisco. And I'm really happy. I talk to my parents sometimes, but I rarely visit them, or with Lisa. I don't have any relationships anymore. Now, I do. My dad recently had a massive heart attack. He almost died. Luckily, he survived and was admitted to the hospital. My mom called me as soon as it happened. And I booked my flight to be with them. The doctors prescribed him a bunch of medicine and told him he needed to exercise. Since he got out of the hospital, my dad has been very emotional and says he wants to spend more time with his family. That he feels lucky to still be here. I understood her wish perfectly. So I stayed at the house for a few more days. Since my job is remote, it wasn't a problem. But I noticed that Lisa hated me being there. I did everything I could to avoid her because we're already grown up and it wasn't the time to argue. Especially after what happened with my dad. One day, at breakfast, my dad suggested we all go on vacation together. Since it had been a long time since we'd done that as a family. At first, he hesitated. But knowing how much it meant to him, I agreed. Lisa, for her part, didn't want to. But she had no choice. My dad took care of everything. Bought the flights. Booked the hotel. and I even scheduled my days off work in advance so I could really enjoy it. But when I arrived at the airport, it turned out my ticket had been cancelled. My dad and I were completely freaked out. He swore he'd paid for everything. We checked the tickets. And of the 4, the only one cancelled was mine. As if by magic. While I was trying to figure out what had happened, I turned to Lisa and saw her signature wicked grin. It was the same face she always had when one of her dirty tricks came out. At that moment, I realized it was her who had cancelled my ticket. Most likely from my dad's computer. I started yelling at her as she stood there, smiling at me as if nothing had happened. I pointed out to my parents that it was all Lisa's doing, because she hadn't wanted me to go on the family trip from the start. But instead of believing me, my mom dismissed my story and let me go. Your sister would never do something like that. Then she told me to stop being jealous of my little sister and that the cancelled ticket had surely been an incredible coincidence. My dad also tried to justify the situation by saying that maybe it was an airline error and that I shouldn't blame Lisa. I was completely frustrated because my parents couldn't even imagine that their spoiled daughter was behind all this mess. There was nothing I could do. The ticket was already cancelled. And there were no more flights that day. Although I could try to fly the next day. I honestly wasn't thrilled at all with the idea of going home, buying another ticket, and traveling alone. It was supposed to be a family trip. Besides, I wasn't happy about having to share a room with Lisa. I hoped she'd mature over time. But if she really was the one who cancelled my ticket, I couldn't help but think about what other things she had planned to ruin my trip. My dad was hesitant at first, and even suggested we all go back and plan another trip afterward. But he quickly started saying he hadn't had a vacation in years. My mom agreed and let me go. You're always traveling for work, so you won't miss much if you don't go. Their words hurt me. I felt like they were waiting for me to tell them to go on without me. I told them they could go if they wanted. And they agreed immediately. Although I didn't want to waste the money for the tickets and rooms. It struck me as odd that they didn't care whether I went or not. It was crystal clear to me that they weren't bothered about going on a family vacation with just the 3 of them. So I stood there alone at the airport, watching my parents and Lisa happily leave for their long-awaited vacation. I decided to return to my apartment in San Francisco. I didn't feel like spending a single day alone at home. I tried to put the whole thing behind me, and instead enjoy the days off I had already scheduled at work. I met up with friends I hadn't seen in a while, and spent the time reading, turning my break into a staycation. During the trip, my parents occasionally video called me. And it was clear how much fun they were having without me. As if my absence wouldn't change anything. It's not that I was devastated about missing the vacation, but I couldn't help feeling excluded. It was yet another reminder of the favoritism that has always existed in my family. I hoped that one day they would realize who Lisa really is. And it seems I finally got my wish. A few days after they left, I woke up to several missed calls from my mom. Worried about my dad's health. I called him back immediately. Luckily, he answered. But he was extremely distressed. I asked him if everything was okay. And he explained that something very serious had happened. It turns out they were starting to notice that my dad's essential heart medications were slowly disappearing. It was a very delicate situation because he couldn't stop taking them given his fragile health. And they were in another country where they didn't know if they could get the same medication. They searched everywhere in her room, but nothing. My mom went to Lisa's hotel room, which was next to theirs, to ask for sunscreen while Lisa was out. And to her surprise, she found all the missing medications carefully stored in Lisa's nightstand. It was a terrible scare. And as soon as she saw them, she called my dad. It ran inside. And there were all the medications they'd been missing for the past few days. I guess that's when they finally realized that their beloved daughter, the so-called Milagro girl, I had put my dad's health at risk. Incidentally, my mom called me, her voice shaking, to ask if they should confront Lisa about this. I asked them not to say anything until they returned. That it was better to give themselves time to process what they felt and gather evidence before confronting her with the truth. I knew talking to Lisa at that moment wouldn't help because she's adept at manipulation and would surely make up any excuse to get away. But something must have happened that night. And my parents ended up confronting Lisa. Very late. I received a call from my dad. His voice slurred, telling me that Lisa was under arrest. I was shocked. He told me that Lisa threw a huge tantrum when they asked her about the medication. She started throwing things and yelling insults, especially at my dad, complaining that he had bought me a ticket when, according to her, I never should have gone. She threatened to teach them a lesson if they continued to have contact with me. When she didn't calm down, and the situation got out of hand, someone from the hotel called the police. When the officers arrived, Lisa insulted them and refused to calm down. So they arrested her. After 24 hours, she was released. But there was nothing my parents could do. Since they couldn't stand being there anymore, and only wanted to return after Lisa was released, they tried to change their flights. But everything fell apart when they realized their passports and wallets were missing. It turned out Lisa had thrown away or hidden the passports. And for now, they were stranded in a foreign country, without documents or money. I think this was the first time my parents began to see my sister for who she really was. My mom, who had always defended her tooth and nail, I was now begging me for help because they had no money or documents to get out of there. She was overwhelmed, shocked, and devastated to discover the true nature of her angelic daughter. I told them not to worry, that I would send them money via Western Union, but that first they needed to find their passports so they could go home. I was sure Lisa hadn't thrown them away. Finally, my parents realized that I had always been truthful about my sister's craziness, and now they were even thanking me for helping them. Even though they didn't take me on the trip, they apologized for their behavior. As much as a part of me would like to forgive them, I can't help but feel resentful for all the years they pushed me aside and preferred my sister. So, am I a bad person for not wanting to forgive my parents? Only because now, after experiencing what it feels like firsthand, they're coming back to beg me to forgive them for going on vacation without me. Update 1. Every day they call me, to tell me how things are going. And I feel increasingly anxious about the situation. It turns out that after Lisa was released from jail the next day, my parents threatened to call the police again if she didn't return the passports. Having no choice, Lisa ended up confessing where she had hidden them. When they returned home, my parents confronted her and told her she had to pack her things and leave because they'd reached her limit and finally saw who she really was. How manipulative and harmful she could be. They even began to think she might put my dad's health at risk again if she stole his medication again. This sparked another shouting match between Lisa and my parents. In the midst of the argument, Lisa yelled at them, venting her anger and resentment. She complained that I didn't want to share them with her and that they had pushed her to the limit when they invited me on the trip. She said they should inherit from me, and that she alone was enough for both of us. It was at that moment that my parents finally realized the extent of her jealousy and how much she resented my place in the family. Although they tried to calm her down, Lisa continued screaming and, in her desperation, threatened them by saying she was going to go everywhere, claiming they had abused her as a child and neglected her, basically accusing them of being bad parents. He then warned them that if they continued to ask him to leave, he would go to the police and file trumped-up charges. That really scared my parents, because a lie like that could ruin their reputations, especially since they're well-known doctors in the community. Just imagine everything they've built coming crashing down because of a lie. It's making them very anxious and they feel trapped. These days, Lisa hasn't stopped making their lives miserable. When she found out they're talking to me more often now, she flew into a rage and even broke dishes. On top of that, she keeps stealing their car keys and hiding them, making it difficult for them to get to work every day. Tonight my mom called me crying after another unpleasant experience at dinner. Lisa made a scene because she wanted my mom to cook for her. But since my mom was tired and didn't want to, Lisa retaliated by breaking furniture all over the house. Then she locked herself in her room and played music, so loud my parents couldn't sleep. Everything's going from bad to worse, and it's already taking a huge toll on them emotionally and mentally. I'm increasingly worried about what might happen. Although I wanted my parents to see what Lisa is really like, now I'm afraid she could put them in real danger. I can't even go back home because that could trigger another bigger fight. I'm trying to convince my parents to find a lawyer so they can finally put an end to this hell. I see legal action as the best option for them to regain their peace of mind and their home. Update 2. Lisa was arrested. Just as many saw it coming, given everything she was doing. It was just a matter of time. One night, she attacked my parents with a knife during an argument. And scared to death, they had no choice but to call the police. The officers arrived in and took her away for assault. Once in custody, my parents realized it was time to find a permanent solution and spoke with a lawyer who explained how they could legally evict her. They served her a formal notice telling her she had to leave. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary for her safety. They didn't want to put her in jail or anything, they just wanted her gone. So they paid her bail and gave her the official notice with clear dates and reasons, making sure to do everything legally, so Lisa couldn't challenge it. They then went to court with the lawyer to file the eviction lawsuit. It was extremely difficult for them to take their own daughter to court. And they felt sad, guilty, and without a way out. In the end, the judge officially ordered Lisa to leave the house. And if she didn't do so willingly, they would have the legal right to remove her. Lisa is leaving next week. And my parents will finally be able to breathe easy, knowing they've taken the step toward reclaiming their home and their peace. It's been a very difficult process. But they have faith that when Lisa leaves, everything will get better. I've been in touch with them throughout this time and plan to bring them to San Francisco with me for a few weeks so they can rest, relax, and leave behind, even a little, all the stress Lisa caused them. It will also be an opportunity to connect and support them in whatever they need. Update 3. I've received hundreds of comments on the post, and it's taken me a while to read them all. Many have suggested we consider having Lisa see a specialist in case there's a mental health issue underlying all of this. But, since she's an adult, we can't force her to get a checkup if she doesn't want to. Even her violent outbursts. We don't want to pressure her further and make things worse. As I mentioned before, my parents are already with me in San Francisco. They came to spend a few days and try to recover after everything they've been through these past few months. Yesterday afternoon, sitting at a table in my apartment, my parents began to open up to me with a humility and remorse that was evident in their voices. They told me that during all those years they hadn't seen what Lisa was really like. And they begged me to forgive them. My dad apologized for not listening to me sooner. He admitted that he never expected Lisa to be like that, and that they hadn't been able to see the truth behind her charming facade. My mom agreed and acknowledged the huge mistake she'd made by downplaying everything I'd said about Lisa all these years. Her voice trembled with pain as she realized how they'd failed me by always favoring her. I let them know I truly appreciated their courage to take the first step of asking for my forgiveness. I shared with them several very painful memories from all those years of torment I endured because of Lisa's actions. My parents listened to me, visibly shocked and moved by the realization of everything I had been through. They only acknowledged the pain I suffered and deeply regretted the loneliness I felt within my own family. They confessed to me that their favoritism for Lisa clouded their judgment, as they never imagined becoming pregnant with her and always saw her as their miracle baby. With voices full of sincerity, they begged me to forgive them for all those years. It was a bittersweet moment for me because for a long time I needed to hear that acknowledgement from them. While it wasn't the ideal way to repair our relationship, it did mark a turning point, bringing the honesty and clarity that had been sorely lacking in the family. For the first time in years, we were truly acknowledging the issues that had plagued us. I told them I would need time to trust them again. And we all agreed we would work together on it. For now, I plan to make the most of the time I have with my family while they're here with me for the next few days. Update 4. As the days went by, my parents and I spent more time together, strolling through the lively streets of San Francisco, enjoying leisurely meals, and simply appreciating being together again. It's been quite a process to reconnect and rebuild the bonds that had frayed from so many years of favoritism and denial. I realized that their decision to seek refuge with me wasn't just to get away from Lisa, but also a desire to rebuild the family they'd almost lost. They needed a fresh start. And so did I. Since then, we've talked about what to do with Lisa. She's staying at a friend's house, and we can't just push her aside, no matter how complicated her life has become. As parents, we feel a huge responsibility for our daughter. Even though her actions are hard to forgive, we accept that her behavior may not just be a bad attitude, but that there could be something deeper going on. We want to explore the possibility of a mental health evaluation to better understand what's happening to her. However, since Lisa is an adult, we can't force her. So we're thinking about the best way to encourage her to seek help on her own. My parents plan to check with her when they get home to see if she's willing to talk. I prefer not to contact her because she still holds a lot of resentment toward me, and I want to prevent the situation from getting worse, especially given her emotional state. Considering what has happened before, with episodes of aggression and violence, I recommended that they meet with her in a public place where it's easier for her to control her emotions. Our goal is for Lisa to understand how we see things and, above all, to understand the love and concern we have for her. It's not about finding someone responsible, but about uniting as a family to face together the problems that have affected us so much.